Alright, got my shock. Got my fancy washer. And my nut. What's going on, everybody? It's Mike with This Old Hot Rod. Thanks for coming back and checking out the Dragster. You can see I still have the body sitting on the chassis. It's been a few days since I put the body on the chassis. That was Monday. It's now Thursday. And what we're going to be working on today is the front spring, and we're going to put on the front shocks and the shock mount. What I need to do is I need to add a couple of leaps to the front spring. The reason being, when I set the car down on the ground, the front spring flattened out. The reason why the spring flattened out as much as it did, not only with the weight of the motor, but because I removed these two leaps. I did a lot of, looking online at photos and, pictures and stuff in the old magazines and books of these old Dragsters. And a lot of these old Dragsters ran 3 leaps on the front spring. So I figured I'll just run 3 leaps on the front spring. It's hard to know exactly proportionately how the weight is distributed on a lot of these, Dragster style cars, because each one is just so unique. I'm just going to jack the front end of the car up, remove the weight on the front spring. There's not a lot of tension on that spring because, again, it's just those 3 leaps. So I can just undo it by hand. I'm going to add those 2 leaps back onto the front spring, put it all back together, lower it back down. But before I do that, I want to measure and see exactly what the difference is going to be. These front springs are about 3/16 or 1/4 of an inch. I think they're about 3/16 thick. I'm going to add, obviously, a little bit of height just by adding the 2 springs, the 2 leaps. But I'm more curious on what the I guess it's like the sag would be, or the free sag, or the preload. We're gonna get this spring, these 2 leaves put back on the front spring, and then in the process of everything, kind of measure everything as I go, just more out of curiosity, just in knowledge. And then after that, so what I'm gonna be using is, I'm gonna be using a Ford F1 shock mount on this Dragster. This is a very common shock mount that you'll see on traditional style cars of the era. I'm going to be using some old chrome shocks for the front to go with my old chrome front spring. And we're going to get these mounted on the chassis once I figure out the preload and everything on the front spring. So let's get to work. The real main difference at this point right now is the weight of the body itself is not on this chassis. At this point, I'm just going to measure it without the weight of the body on it, obviously, and kind of see where we're at. And then see what difference it makes adding those 2 leaps, not only with the height of the actual springs themselves, but with the resistance of having those 2 extra leaps, because this spring is really flat. And that's not what you want. I'm at 11 inches. Right to the very point of this, I'm at 11 inches. I said a few minutes ago, there's just not a lot of spring pressure. Don't do this if you have a full spring pack. You'll blow your hand apart, especially if it's the rear. But on the front, with just 3 leaps, I knew I could just pull this apart by hand. I put it together by hand. So right out of the gate, I know this is going to add quite a bit of tension to the spring, which is going to eliminate some sag. All right. So let's see where that is now. So a few minutes ago we were at 11 inches. Now automatically we're going to be up, what are we going to be up? Half an inch. So those leaves are 1/4 of an inch each. And we are exactly at 12. So we added not only did we add a 1/2 inch of additional height, we added a 1/2 inch of preload. that means I'll have an additional ½ inch or an inch of travel, which is great. What I want to make sure I do first is I want to set the lower shock mount first. And then that's going to determine where the top of my shock is going to be and how exactly it is I'm either going to mount or bend and heat and bend and shape these. There is a hole already back here in the frame which I think I'm going to try to use. And then my second hole, which I had originally planned on doing, was putting the bolt through the top hole, and I'm going to put a piece of tubing on the top of the frame rail. That'll allow me to keep these shock mounts a little more vertical to get the height that I need because of the height of the shock. Then I can heat and bend my shock mount. I'm going to be pretty close. I'm going to use these early Ford style engine mount bolts. So this is the bolt that would go through the biscuit style mount for a flathead Ford V8. See, it goes right through the shock. It fits perfectly. It's got a nice big head on it where you can use to weld to wherever you want to weld it to. These are the two pieces that I cut off of my wishbone mounts. I'm going to cut these down and I'm going to mimic the shape of that. You see how it's got kind of that 45-degree bend? I'm basically going to use just the center section of this. I'm going to cut off those bends and then I'm going to re-bend the center section, and then I'm going to drill the hole that I need to fit that shank through, and then we're going to mount right underneath the bottom side of the wishbone itself. So it should go pretty quick. Alright, so let's get to work on cutting these down and getting some holes drilled. I'm going to cut these flanges off that kind of flank off to the side. I'm going to remove those, figure out exactly where my bolt needs to be. The bolt will be through this and it'll be welded to the underside of my wishbone. Let's go. .95. Now obviously they don't have to be exact, but I'd like them to be close. This one is 4.97. Just a whisker off. Alright, so they're even. So now what I want to do, so 4.95, so 2.5, so that should be about the center. Now I know things don't have to be perfect, but it's nice to just take your time, right? It shows in the final result. And I've noticed a big difference in my fabricating skills since I've been taking my time with things. It's nice to see things work out, measurements work out, everything be even and level. It's just a big difference. Alright, so now I'm going to go get these over on the drill press. Get these holes drilled. Alright, so you can see here, these are where my flanges are going to be bent back. That's the center mark where my hole is going to be drilled. Okay, so I have these mounts all set, ready to go, but what I'm going to do before I bend them, I want to get them cleaned up, but I don't want to eliminate the line that I made. So I'm just going to take my cutoff wheel and just scribe the line so I can see where I want to bend them. I'm going to recreate the shape of them originally because right now they're flat. So you can see these marks that I just made. So I'm going to eliminate these bottom pieces here. And that's what they look like now. Alright, so I've got these two lower mounts built or fabricated here. And I've been kind of going at them slowly with this small little file, opening up the diameter of the hole. It's like a machine fit, it's so tight. These bolts go in here like so. That is what the mount is going to look like for now. So this is where I'm at. I've come to a crossroad because I can turn down a couple of nuts to make a spacer to take up that smooth shank with a washer on it, and that will close the shock inside this mount. But then I'll have to put a nut here, but it's really long. I don't know that I like it so long. Or I could cut these threads off and then run a die, which I have somewhere around here, right here. I could cut new threads on this collar, and then that would eliminate the issue of it being so long. Or I could cut this entire thing off, right at this collar here, and then drill out the bolt all the way through, and then tap internally and put a bolt inside with a washer. I think that would probably be the coolest thing I could do, but not only is it more work, is it going to compromise the bolt? I don't know. I don't know if this is hardened. I don't think it is, because if I cut it and then have to drill it, I won't be able to. So I don't really know what to do. I don't know. That's the thread that I need. Yeah, I'm just going to cut these off. Alright, so it's definitely not hardened metal, which is good. But what I think I need to do is turn this collar down just a touch more so the shock isn't wiggling. So this is what I've got so far. So you see that little collar right there. So I want to turn that down another 1/8 of an inch. You can see that little clean shelf to the same diameter as that washer. So with the shock on the bracket and that washer, that will leave me the threads. So now all I got to do is run a die over that, and then these shock mounts are ready to clean up and weld onto the lower side of the wishbone. I'm just going to have to eyeball it, I guess, you know. Hot rods are fun. Now I'm sure I probably could have bought this bolt. I know I could have bought lower shock mounts, but it's fun using early Ford parts and using stuff that you already have, especially when you're trying to build a car that's period correct, as they say. Adds to the challenge, adds to the journey. That's one shock bolt. Why isn't my camera thing doing the thing? Can you see? Yes, you can see that now. My camera lens must have been dirty. You'd be hard pressed to find a cooler shock bolt than that. Alright, got my shock. Got my fancy washer. And my nut. Alright, so I got these welded down, so those are good now. What I want to do is I want to get a good idea of where exactly this shock is going to land. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to heat and bend this first, straighten this out, and then once it cools down, I'll be able to put the shock through that eyelet, through the hole in the top of the shock, and figure out exactly where I need my mount to go. So let's fire up the torch and get these heated. Alright, y'all. That's what my front shocks are going to look like. You can see the sleeve here that got welded on the top of the frame. You saw that. I heated and bent the F1 shock mount. Made sure it was level. I didn't have a lot of wiggle room with the outside angle, so it is what it is. So it's at 75.7, so it's at about 15 degrees. You know, maybe for a street car, people say something about 30 degrees. I think they look good. They're nice and clean. They're simple. And that's what I wanted. So I'm really happy with the way they turned out. I like the old chrome. Makes it look period correct, which is what I'm certainly going for with this build. It needs to be. I think my next project is going to be the gas tank mount. It's going to go essentially where this plate is, but it's not going to be a plate. It's going to be fancy. Alright everybody, that is going to be it for me for this particular video. I kind of lost track of the episode number, which is pretty typical of me. I think it's like episode 8 or 9. really happy to get those front shock mounts off of the list. It actually took me quite a bit longer than I thought it was going to. Again, I am taking more time on my fabricating and making sure, you know, just things are more even and just focusing more on the details. And I think at the end of the day, it's really going to pay off. I think people are really going to appreciate the car for what it is, the build quality for what it is, the parts that I'm using, how I'm using those parts. Hopefully the simplicity of the build will kind of stand out, even though when you create things that are more simple looking, they typically take a lot more time to fabricate, which it's not a huge project, and I have the time between now and the race in May, so I'm kind of just spending a little more time on the details and my fabricating skills, like I've said in the past. The next episode is going to be getting the fuel tank mounted. I was going to jump right into the body, but I want to just get some of these more smaller mechanical bits of fabrication done, because once I get into the body, I think it's going to be kind of time consuming, to be completely honest with you. I need to get the body set in place where it's going to be. I need to get all the bracing put in place. I need to remove a lot of pieces of the body, like I had said before, the firewall, the underside of the fuel tank, the internal pieces on the doors. Those are going to be removed for weight reduction. So thanks everybody for following along. Appreciate those people who have put in some orders just recently. Thank you. Goes a long way. I put it right back into the channel, right into this particular build at this point, because that's what I'm working on. And we'll see you guys next time. This old hot rod. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.